is Keys to the Shop, episode 395, Connecting Roasters and Producers with Henry Wilson of the Producer Roaster Forum. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFerio. I'm your host for the show, and I'm really excited to have you listening to Keys to the Shop. There's so much to discover, especially if you're new to the show. One great way to stay updated with all of the great content is, of course, to subscribe. Just hit subscribe wherever you're listening right now. Go on to Apple Podcasts and give a like or a 5-star review, rather, to the show. That would be awesome. And share these episodes all around the social media world. Whoever's following you, just kind of share this episode or share Keys to the Shop with your friends and teammates, etc. That really goes a long way to spread the word about Keys to the Shop. Thank you, everybody, for doing that. And I want to let you know that Keys to the Shop is not just a podcast, but it also is a consulting and coaching company. What I love to do is work one-on-one with owners of specialty coffee shops who are looking to bring their cafes to the next level. We work through a lot of different challenges and issues that might be happening, or just work through opportunities that you have with scaling or refinement, finding clarity to give you your time back, to give you joy, to help you thrive in business and help your people love working in your coffee bar. There's so much that can come from just having these in-depth coaching conversations on a regular basis. And I would invite you to reach out, chris@keystotheshop.com, and we'll set up a free strategy call to talk about what's going on in your coffee shop and how Keys to the Shop Consulting can help you. Again, if you're interested in working one-on-one with me to help you bring your coffee shop to the next level, or to help you start your coffee shop in the right place with a good foundation, go ahead and email me. Let's talk. chris@keystotheshop.com. Well, one of the things that keeps the industry moving forward is innovation. And innovation happens when people look at something and they think, can we do this better? Are we able to take what the status quo is and elevate it and thus change the way that people perceive the product? And that is exactly what the ground control Cyclops brewer does for coffee brewing. The folks over at Voga Coffee have created what is probably the best brewer you could purchase to bring out the best in your coffee. The extraction capabilities of the machine are astounding, giving you control over depth and range of flavors that other equipment couldn't even touch. So check them out at groundscontrol.coffee to learn more information about this amazing piece of equipment. It's not just a next level batch brewer though, but it also makes batched iced lattes, batch cold brew, tea. So there's a ton of efficiencies that you gain with workflow and products that brings profitability. The ground control is just amazing. I think you really should be looking to get a ground control in your cafe if that's what you're looking for: quality, efficiencies, and just a beautiful piece of equipment at the same time. So go check them out again over at groundscontrol.coffee. Consistency is one of the things that customers trust you to do behind the bar. They want you to make sure that your baristas are trained and that you're sourcing good ingredients, and it's no different for plant-based beverages. You want to make sure that you're using something that is consistent each and every time. And that is one of many reasons why I love the Barista Series from Pacific. The Barista Series is created for baristas and tested by baristas before it even gets released to the public. So you know it's going to stand up to the heat from steaming, produce awesome texture, ready for latte art, and also keep the balance of the beverage focused on coffee. Imagine that. It's really an amazing product. I would encourage you to go to pacificfoodservice.com to learn more about this and get samples to try for yourself. If you're looking for the best plant-based beverages to serve your customers, quality and consistency, intentionality behind every one of the beverages, then it has to be the Barista Series from Pacific. Okay, everyone. Well, I'm excited to have on the show today someone who I've wanted to, get on the show for a little bit now, and that is none other than Henry Wilson. Henry Wilson is the founder of Perfect Daily Grind, also the founder of the Producer Roaster Forum and Coffee Intelligence over at intelligence.coffee. Now, you might know these names because the Perfect Daily Grind is a ubiquitous presence in the coffee industry in terms of putting out so many articles across a range of topics in the industry that help keep us informed about what's going on in international markets and local markets around coffee, barista work, roasting, you name it. So Perfect Daily Grind has been grinding. Sorry, the pun there, but for the better part of 10 years now. And not only that, ever since 2016, the Producer Roaster Forum has been taking things to the next level in terms of keeping people informed, bringing roasters and producers together, not only to do business, but to create relationships and to do nothing less than change the landscape of the coffee industry and the coffee trade. And this is what we're going to be talking to Henry about today. A little bit of how he got into the business of coffee and starting Perfect Daily Grind. And then we talk about the Producer Roaster Forum and its genesis, purpose, and the results thus far as they gear up for their sixth event. And the topic that comes up throughout this conversation is the idea of how we as professionals examine what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we can do it better. How are we being informed, and does it actually serve the purpose of creating a more sustainable industry? There's a lot to learn in this conversation as Henry lays out the ways that he has evolved his perception of the industry through his coffee journey, and how these events and just the idea of nuance in conversation creates better decisions and better relationships for everyone moving forward. So if you're a roaster, if you're a retailer, that's pretty much all of you. I think you're really going to get a lot from this conversation with Henry. So without anything else from me, let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation about connecting roasters and producers with Henry Wilson. Henry Wilson, welcome to Keys to the Shop. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I've been wanting to have you on the show for quite a bit, actually. Your presence in the industry and online is ubiquitous through Perfect Daily Grind, and we're going to be really talking a lot about the Producer Roaster Forum. And you've done a lot in the past. It's been, when we were talking before recording, it seems well over 6 years. It's probably closer to 10 years that you've been in the coffee business itself through this medium, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So just to start off here, before you got into this, I mean, how did you begin just latching onto coffee as something that you became passionate about? And when Perfect Daily Grind started, was it something that you had anticipated growing to the degree that it has?
Absolutely not. In response to your second question, it was completely a hobby of mine that I did almost exclusively just for fun. And the way that Perfect Daily Grind started is that when I went to university, every summer I used to go to South America and Ecuador, pretty much to go and travel around and spend time. I had friends I used to stay with, and I didn't really have that much to do. So one thing I thought would be really cool to do was to do a barista course. So I did a kind of a short barista course in a coffee school in Quito called the Coffee Academy and really enjoyed it. Thought, this is interesting. Then when I was in my final year of university, I started just kind of exploring and tasting different origins. And that was very much when, for me at least, it felt at the time that specialty coffee was in its infancy. And when I refer to specialty coffee, I kind of mean the growth of the third wave roasters and lightly roasted coffee. And there was a real buzz around it. And how I ended up starting Perfect Daily Grind was essentially, it's in two parts, but I got given an AeroPress for Christmas from my auntie, and I had no clue how to use it. And I remember making coffee and finding that literally every time I made it, it tasted different. So I went on Facebook and I kind of scanned all these forums and ended up having this like community of baristas and coffee lovers where we would share ideas about brew ratios and stuff like that. And basically I decided, well, my very, very first articles, which was perfectdailygrind.com, WordPress.com, the website was horrendously designed, hardly worked, was was basically AeroPress recipes. I remember I shared it, and I think it got something like 70 likes, and for me that was phenomenal. And I was doing it in my free time while I was at university, and that kind of inspired me to keep looking for information about coffee. And I remember feeling like there was a gap where I was really interested in where coffee came from and how it was produced, but at the time there wasn't that many resources or information surrounding that. So when I finished university, I got a job at a management consultancy firm in London, and I basically agreed with them that I'd start 6 months later than planned to do something productive. And I didn't really tell them what I was going to do, but basically what I did was I took a flight to Costa Rica, and I traveled on my own all the way up to Honduras, actually to Guatemala, for 4 months. And I mean, I did absolutely everything from visiting cooperatives, visiting coffee exporters, spending a day in a fertilizer shop, hanging out with coffee roasters. And I was really just trying to understand like the story kind of behind the cup and everything that happens along the journey of the coffee supply chain, really with a particular interest in the production and processing side, and essentially what happens in the coffee producing countries. And I remember I visited quite a few different producers, but several producers had quite a deep impact on me in the sense that they really did outstandingly creative and brilliant things in their farms, ranging from the ways of pruning the trees to the intercropping of coffee with other fruits. And when I asked them how did they share this information with potential buyers or even with the industry, they were kind of like, well, when people come, I show it to them. And then after that, I was kind of left me thinking, like, oh, there's lots of stuff that happens here. This is really interesting, and not just because I love the taste of coffee, but I was almost drawn more to the people. And then when I traveled back to the UK and I started working in this management consultancy firm, every day after work and also at the weekends, I used to go and visit coffee shops. And I realized that when I was talking about what I saw, it was quite interesting to people. So I decided, okay, well, why don't I try and write 3 blog posts or 3 articles a week? So what I used to do was I used to work at this company, it was Accenture. I'd get back at about 8, sleep for a bit or have dinner, and then work on Perfect Daily Grind till like midnight. And I did that for about a year. And then basically I decided to quit the job that I had the management consultancy company to go ahead and go full time on Perfect Daily Grind, which I thought was a brilliant idea. But then I found out quite quickly that it's not as easy as I thought it would be to sell digital advertising on a niche coffee publication, which it was at the time. But it kind of gradually grew and it grew. And eventually I was able to move back out of my parents' house.
Nice. Oh, there's success right there. You're talking about your own journey as a coffee entrepreneur simultaneous to your journey as a consumer. You're learning a lot about the industry as you write about the industry. So everyone gets to experience your evolution while at the same time getting a picture into what's happening in coffee beyond just the world of your kitchen and your AeroPress and that kind of thing, which is great. And I'm curious about like how your perspective on the industry itself as you built this changed, because you're going through all these, personal challenges to, produce this. It's very strenuous. And obviously you're being motivated by something that would make you want to quit a nice consultancy job. So what is it about the coffee industry as you began to discover more about it that spurred you on, and how did people receive the content as it evolved?
Initially, I mean, when you have any sort of content medium, whether it be a publication or a podcast, I think it's very important to be led by your readership and to basically produce content which is both enlightening and educational informative, but also simultaneously is reflecting what people want to read. And I think that fortunately, when you have a digital publication in a direct feedback loop where every single post you do, every article you write, you can immediately see how people respond to that. For me, like I really got into coffee, not so much because of the taste or the experience surrounding coffee, but because I felt like there was a space and a story to be told. Like we have this elaborate coffee supply chain, which we love in the specialty coffee industry to try and oversimplify. But there are so many actors along the way which add so much value. And for me, I remember when I would go back and forth from Latin America and when I spent time traveling, I really realized that there was so much value which wasn't being captured or documented. And I wanted to create a space for that. as the platform developed, I think my perspectives changed on the industry. And that also shifted the content as we've grown as well.
How has that really changed the dialogue and actually made substantial change for people like the farmer?
Well, I think that in any context, the more informed or educated we are about anything, we're able to make more informed, like intelligent decisions. So if we're looking, say, at roasters, if they have access to information about how coffee is sourced, how it's processed, about everything that happens along the supply chain, by having that information, they can empathize more with everyone along the supply chain, but also make a better decision, which is better precisely for their business. And I also think that as professionals, particularly on the consumption side, often through the nature of how the industry is developed, we speak on behalf of some of the others on the coffee supply chain. Even if you look at the barista championships, typically you have the barista standing there presenting the coffee of the producer and talking on their behalf. So it's very important that we know about what happens before that, particularly because if you're a barista or if you're a cafe owner, if you're a roaster, often you're that connection point. And fundamentally, like if we know a little bit more about everything that happens from the coffees that we're roasting and selling, then we can communicate that value to consumers. And let's face it, like consumers have a phenomenal choice of coffees available. Like they can go to a supermarket, all different price points, all different roast profiles. But if a roaster really wants to stand out and find a different point of differentiation, they need to know what everyone else is doing. They need to know about everything happening in the supply chain to find that unique value proposition.
Yeah, good point. So you have to have sort of a baseline to know how much different are you going to be than the industry. So you have to know the industry. But then also in specialty coffee, we moralize our businesses often. It's not just a transactional thing. In fact, we talk about this when it comes to hospitality. It's not just a grab your coffee and go. We want to welcome you with, connection and talk about this with our customers. And we talk about it with our coffee as well. And so I imagine also the idea that if you want to make an impact and make a difference on the world that is not your own, namely the producing world that you represent, as you mentioned, it's important that you understand how your money is spent, and maybe it wouldn't be a point of differentiation necessarily. It would be more of like a point of effectiveness, like where are we going to most effectively spend our money?
Exactly. And it's a combination of both. Like it's good business to be an expert on the product that you're selling in all capacities and to know what's happening, although that some of the things that you find out might not be exactly what you want to know. But fundamentally, if you know how coffee is sourced, if you know what happens along the supply chain, then you can ask the appropriate questions to your green coffee sourcing partner or the producer that you work with, and vice versa. And Perfect Daily Grind is also in Spanish and also in Portuguese for similar reasons, that we want to have that open information flow. So, for example, with Pedido Español, the articles currently published are written by local writers in local areas so they can actually be relevant to that audience. And we're constantly tweaking the content based on the feedback, the response we get, the number, the engagement, the views, and everything.
That's wonderful. That obviously is going to bring a lot more people into the conversation. That's one of the most important movements, not to, claim again that one thing is going to save the industry, but if there was a concept that was at the heart of what will save the industry, it is the balancing of the power equation between those who are producing and those who are consuming and making decisions. We talked with Costa Calabrusis recently about the idea of involving farmers in taste making. And we've talked with the president of Pachamama out in California, whose bosses are coffee farmers and they own their supply chain. And so that feels like the next, wave, or like hopefully the direction that the industry is going, a lot more of a collaborative, cooperative model globally, not just cooperative as in the coffee farm. So that's wonderful. And I'm just curious, and maybe this will be, I don't want to say playing devil's advocate, but there's this idea of marketing as an effective means to produce a demand for a product that can then be sold because of the demand the market makes for it. So the idea that we would take something like direct trade and take it down a few notches by exploring and poking holes in it and saying, yeah, but it doesn't really work that well. And this article says this, and it shows an expose format, like how it's not all it's cracked up to be. What's the balance, if any, in sort of increasing nuance in the conversation and taking what we have and pushing it with confidence out into the market, even though we know it's not a perfect solution? I mean, does nuance rob marketing of its efficacy?
Well, it depends. What is the goal of the marketing? Is the goal of the marketing to maximize sales for the roaster? Or is the goal of, say, rather than the marketing or the sale, is it to redistribute, say, wealth? Because they're two different things. And frankly, like, I can see value in both of them for the different parties. So I think it depends on the baseline. I think that fundamentally, like I say, it's very important as an industry for us to keep revising and challenging and looking at things and thinking about, well, does that still make sense? Has it lived up to what we thought it would be? Because if we really look at it, like the specialty coffee industry, we're pretty critical of, say, I don't really like this word, but the commercial industry, right? We'll look down on certain chains. We'll look down on certain types of coffees, and we'll often benchmark our coffees as being higher quality because they're not that. It's like almost us versus them. So we're already doing it. So for me, it makes sense then to look internally and evaluate. With your question, I think that yes, there's always tools and there's narratives that the industry can use to, and particularly say roasters, to promote and sell their coffees. But I think we have to be delicate at what we're doing because it does have an impact and it does send a message. And if we are promoting certain concepts or ideals as the solutions, then we have to be informed about them. And we also have to be aware they're constantly changing and adapting because there's so many nuances in everything. And I think that when I look at where the industry is now as opposed to 10 years ago, I think that a lot of things have come and passed. And also we've really cross-examined and re-examined certain ideals and probably said, well, actually, maybe that's not where it is. But I think the idea of positioning to a consumer that by paying a price premium, they're doing, and for quality, that they're helping people, I think it's a complex thing. I like it fundamentally. As a consumer, I love to go to a supermarket. I'm not informed about, I don't know, avocados and bananas. So if there's an option to buy a more sustainable alternative, I'm all about that. But also, I don't have the time to audit and understand what's happening there. So I do just trust the brands. I also think that now we're in a much more contested marketplace for specialty coffee roasters where they have to really look at what their offering is and how can they stand out. Because 10 years ago, the idea, I mean, we're focusing on direct trade, but I don't want to even demonize this because I think it's fantastic, the roasters that do it and source coffee directly from cooperatives or producers. And I think it's a huge step forward. But I think that there's lots of elements to it. And I also think that we shouldn't necessarily be leveraging someone else's poverty to sell our product at a premium.
Mm. Yeah, I would call that the equivalent of just that poverty tourism mindset that usually you have with a lot of ecotourism in general, not even just coffee, just the idea that people are going to, spend their time in places where, the whole goal might be simply to make them grateful that they don't live there. and
Yeah, and I think a lot of producers won't necessarily mind fundamentally. Like if they get given a price premium, happy days. But really, like, is it sustainable? Because let's say everyone's talking about an impending recession. Let's say that comes along. Will the consumer think, well, I was buying that to help, so I'm gonna go now to a different coffee because now budget's a little bit tight, or are they buying it for the value of the experience it gives them, the flavor, social currency, whatever it might be? I think that's important because we don't want people to be buying our coffees as roasters just because they feel like it's an act of charity.
Oh yeah. So the charitable aspect is in what you're saying is it's not sustainable because it's a peak and high peak and a low valley in terms of, people aren't going to buy on charity as consistently as they will on utility. And if we can raise the level of that utility to be underneath the surface, a very thriving and sustainable and fair market, then that's the bigger win right there than just getting, people to buy a bag because they feel sorry for somebody.
Yeah, and I do think that most people, if I look at most of my friends outside of the industry, they buy specialty coffee because it tastes better. And I think that's fundamentally much more important in terms of the long-term scalability and sustainability of the sector.
Yeah. And the one thing that I'm reminded of in the conversation I mentioned with Pachamama, Thalion Tremaine, the president, had mentioned that there's such an importance in brand development. This is not what he said, but it's like, I want to buy from this company and they represent a lot of different coffees, and whatever they produce, I love, which means there's a lot more stability in for the farmers that they represent, because we're not burdening the consumer with this deep and soul-wrenching conversation. We're allowing them to purchase at a point of trust where we've done all the hard work and heavy lifting on the other end to make sure that it is in fact sustainable, rather than making it a heavy conversation at the cash register. It doesn't seem like we're going to win over that many people.
Yeah, and you have to meet people where they're at. So when I started Perfect Daily Grind, I used to really kind of sit down with people, make a coffee with them, and study their reaction as they drank it. And even with Perfect Daily Grind on the Pili Espanol, we publish a lot of content. It's 5 articles a week, and I used to pay a lot of attention to who was reading it, and almost kind of forwarding stuff onto people saying you should read this. And what I learned is the best way is it's there, and if people want to read it and engage with it, fantastic. If they don't, there's no value for me saying you need to do this. You should know this.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Producer Roaster Forum, because the actual organization and event is, in essence, what we want to have happen between the two ends of the supply chain. We want there to be a forum, a discussion, so that the things that, like you said, not everybody wants to be represented the way that we assume they want to be represented. And so these conversations within this event seem like they would produce an incredible amount of clarity for those involved, so that they can take the next step forward instead of just kind of repeating the same, mistakes or lines without context. Talk a little bit about how that first started and what the goal of it was.
Yeah, so the Producer Roaster Forum, the very first event was in December 2016. So it was quite a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the real focus was to build a world-class event at Origin. And essentially, I remember speaking with one of my colleagues who's running the event, Julio, and we were talking about some of his friends and family in El Salvador. And the feedback that he was giving was saying, look, it's a lot of money for people to travel to SCA and a lot of these global trade shows. And when they go, if they can afford to go, the platform is not necessarily built for them. And we were kind of talking about it and talking about, well, what was the profile of these producers? And then we thought, well, why don't we just go ahead and make a small event? It wasn't called the Producer Roaster Forum, it was called the Micro Coffee Festival, with the principal goal of bringing a select group of roasters. At the time, I think it was about 12 in the first one, from across the world. We had roasters from the UK, the US, Saudi Arabia, all different sorts of places, and oblige them to stay in coffee farms together for 3 days or so. And then we'll have a forum or a mini festival. But really what it was is targeted educational lectures from both producers and roasters on select curated topics which we worked on, and then some few other activities sprinkled in, like cuppings. And the focus was always, let's build commercial relationships, because the feedback that we always get from producers is, we love to go to trade shows, we love to do that, but really what we want is, we want to find potential green coffee buyers for our products. And also another focus of opening up new markets. So we've even done that very first event, we thought, well, a lot of people who are producers in El Salvador, and the event was only around 100 people or so, they already sell coffee to the US and Canada and, say, the UK, where else? And then we really made an effort to invite and to get other roasters to join. But part of the vision was really like to shift the dynamic, to make Latin America in this context an information hub and source, rather than kind of a passive recipient. And then, of course, the whole concept of price is key. So I love the international trade shows. We go to them as a company, but a lot of producers, it's completely out of their price budget and price range. So instead of paying for a flight, traveling, taking days off work, having issues missing the harvest, having to hire local people, finding hotels in the US to stay in, People can just drive in the context of El Salvador 30 minutes, drive home, come back. And the event every year has grown. So the first iteration was very intimate, very real. People were kind of giving up their time to be part of this grassroots movement. And it was really, really different. Like I remember we had, even in El Salvador, we had producers from Brazil, Cameroon, and then we had roasters from across the world. And people really felt like they were part of something. It was like, we're all collecting here to talk about different issues in the industry and share ideas. And it was also very, very collaborative. And it was an experience that I hadn't really seen that much, where roasters were genuinely meeting, who might even have competition technically, to share ideas and talk about how they source coffee. I don't know, how they consolidated containers, techniques they use to scale wholesale sales. Similarly, producers were doing the same thing. And the event sold out almost immediately. But one thing that we did also learn when we did this very first event in 2016 was, of course, back then it wasn't an official company, it was just a small event that was part of Perfect Daily Grind, was that we put the tickets online, we promoted it through Perfect Daily Grind on the English site, and it sold out, the event. But on the day's event, what I really realized is that although we'd traveled all the way to El Salvador, we built the infrastructure of this event, was that it was the same people from El Salvador that went to the US. Because of course, they're the ones reading Perfect Daily Grind in English. They know what's happening in the industry. They understand the commercial value of the roasters we're bringing, and also they're smart, dynamic business people that want to know about the future of coffee. They want to interact in these discussions. So every year we've seen things like that, and we've had to adjust the event to ensure that smallholders, producers, which is the primary group we really want to encourage to participate and derive value, are present. And then we looked at that and said, well, actually they're present, but they're not engaging. So how do we get the producers to be more involved? Do we need to have a training session the day before? Do we need to build guides on WhatsApp and send to them rather than email, because they're not so keen on email? Do we need to encourage roasters, in fact, to be a bit more briefed on how to interact with a smallholder producer who hasn't left, say, their town that many times and doesn't speak English and actually is used to selling their coffee in cherry? So when they interact with a roaster who tells them they're spending $6 a pound on green coffee on the spot, there's a whole discussion. So for me, like, what we always try to do as a company, and the whole team is behind this, is we always want to ensure that we have an active strategy to make sure the event is locally relevant in terms of campaigns, material, and everything that we do. And also we take a big effort, particularly not just on the producer side, but on the roaster side, to curate really amazing experiences and amazing groups. So the event that we have in El Salvador on the 16th and 17th of March is divided into two parts. So this is the 6th edition of the event that we have, and it's going to take place in El Salvador. And we have the first 3 days is the sourcing trip experience. Typically, we have around 150 green coffee buyers from across the world participating on that. And it is really, really cool, not just because it's our event, but because we have roasters who are buying hundreds of containers of coffee. We have micro roasters who are sourcing phenomenal micro lots or just starting off and want to learn. We have roasters or brands who specialize in high-end coffee capsules. We have roaster brands that perhaps have a cold brew facility in Japan. And what we do is, for the first 3 days of the sourcing trip experience, we analyze all the group of the roasters that we have. So we're currently doing it now. There's still time to sign up. We went through and we looked through the profile of each of the roasters, right? So we have some from, say, Germany, some from the US, some from Taiwan, all over the world. We'll go through, we'll analyze their needs, both in terms of education and also green coffee buying. And then we'll curate groups of 10 to 15. So we'll make a big effort to have a real mix of roasters in each group. And for the first 3 days of the sourcing trip experience, the roasters are picked up from the airport, received by their host, which is some of the best producers and exporters in El Salvador. And they spend 3 days learning about coffee production, visiting farms, cuppings, all the things that people do on a typical origin trip. But the really special thing is that you have a very dynamic, diverse group of business owners or decision makers who are all there with the express goal of they want to be there because they want to learn. They've taken time off work and they're interacting not only between the producer and the roaster, but also the roasters themselves. And I've seen a lot of roasters attend the event, and it's basically kind of encouraging to rethink their entire business model, because they might have a small roast, they've just started and they're really excited and they've just set everything up, and they get to spend 3 days with someone who has 60 locations across Canada. because of the dynamic of the event and how people are, the producer might ask a question, the roaster might, and then all these roasters begin chatting, and you can see it happening. Similarly, roasters might decide to consolidate containers and bring coffees and work out how to do that. They might find ways to make a more lean coffee supply chain in the sense that paying the same price to the producer, but minimizing costs along there. So we have the 3 days in the farms, which is the sourcing drip experience, and then we have the 2-day producer roaster forum. So this is the big event, and we're anticipating 3,000-4,000 people to attend this event in El Salvador. And we have the lecture theatre, 1,000 seats, where we have world-class speakers and Salvadoran speakers speaking on all different topics of the coffee supply chain. But what we really do is we sit down with producers and we try and identify which topics producers want to learn about and curate a speaker schedule on that. So, for example, we have stuff this year on RTD, which is a big push, and also producers that they want to know how to export coffee to China and to the Middle East. So we have talks on that. And then outside of that, we also have like a trade show area. We have 60 booths or so. But then we also have a workshop area where we have workshops, say, with World Barista champion Dale Harris. We have Sam Cora, who's also champion and also a trainer of various champions, who the producers can go through, and baristas and local coffee professionals in Central America can go and get mentorship from. We have the National Brewers Cup, we have the National Barista Championship, and we also have 2 events which we created ourselves along the same vision of building locally relevant events, such as the Global Roasting Contest and the Cold Brew Championship. And all this event, for me, when I look at everything that we're doing and everything that the team is putting together, is we're always looking at how can we do things better, but also we're trying to focus on what does success look like. Because in any business, you want to sit down and think, well, what does success look like? What's the wrong we're trying to right, or what's the goals from this? And I think that the event it really has come down to that the last event last year in Colombia was really very successful, so much so that we're going to do 2 events this year, one in El Salvador in March and one in Colombia in September. The focus is to really bring the event to a coffee producing country so that locals can come and experience a world-class event and everything that comes into it comes with it. And also to add that missing component, which most local events in coffee producing countries don't have, which is international coffee buyers. And not because producers want to meet buyers and sell their coffee. Yes, they do. And when you speak to almost all producers, that is their priority. But also because it's a different dynamic. So I'm just looking at one group now. We have someone from Germany, we have someone from Poland, we have someone from Egypt, we have someone from the UK, we have someone from Japan. Like, this dynamic of people getting together and spending time together leads to real discussion and also just value. It's a bit like, Chris, if you were to go and spend, say, a small retreat with other podcast owners from across the world, maybe not even specifically just in the niche of coffee, but other areas, like, there's a big value to be taken from that. And it's almost like mentorship and training that people can take from it.
It feels a lot like how you described the curation of content just when you first started. The idea was that you knew there was more to the story than was just at the surface, and that by continuing to do your due diligence and investigate and have sort of a curious mind towards it, you uncover all these layers and nuances. Now, this is a live version of that, right? Where everybody is really filling in the gaps of understanding relationally. It sounds extraordinarily powerful. And I guess the question I have right now after this will be your 6th event, is the change that you've noticed in terms of how roasters approach their particular part of the supply chain and how producers approach their part. How have those 2 groups evolved in course with this event? How has the event impacted the way that they approach their business in a substantive way?
It's a really good question. And every year we try to build and add more value to everyone who attends, because that's good for the event, it's good for the participants, it's also good for us. And like I said, particularly the sourcing trip experience is not just an origin trip. It's a lot more than that. It's about spending time with like-minded entrepreneurs and coffee people and learning from them. But I've noticed a shift in roasters, and it's been very, very interesting because when we first started, it was basically my good friends, roasters who joined. and came along to support the idea of what we're trying to build. And it kind of snowballed and grew and grew. But what I've seen is that we have all different profiles, and often roasters will say, look, actually, we've got our coffee sourcing sorted. Like, we'll just come to the producer roaster forum. We'll just come to the 2-day event. And then when they've attended, they've said, wow, that was one of the best experiences we've had, because yes, we spent time with the producers and learned about coffee production and processing, but it was the relationships I built with other roasters and that learning. So there's lots of elements to it, but it's not just about cupping coffees and sitting down with producers and sourcing like the optimal microlot. It's about spending time with, say, other green coffee trading partners in the group, and then talking to you about, well, how does financing work? Like, if you want to buy coffee direct from a producer, how does that work? How does it work with the logistics? Are you going to buy directly from the farm? Are you going to buy FOB? Are you going to buy on spot? And when those discussions occur, and you've got a whole room of roasters, some of which, say, boutique high-end lots locally from wherever they're based, to some who are buying tens or hundreds of containers of coffee and have their supply chain sorted, like, there's a really interesting discussion. So I'd say that component is very, very key. And then also, as we try to integrate more and more competitions into the event, that's also been really valuable, because a lot of roasters who've attended the event have sourced coffees, particularly for competitions, and really had a story to tell based on their experience with that. And I also think that it has been, in my honest opinion, I've seen some, I'm not going to name names about roasters at all, but like some very high profile roasters who are buying outstanding cup of excellence coffees who have come, and it was almost a shock. I remember particularly when we did the event at the Producer Roaster Forum in Guatemala, we have a scheme with the Producer Roaster Forum, which is called the Scholarship Scheme, or the Becados in Spanish. And it's sponsored by Moyoga Organics, who's the main sponsor of the event. And frankly, like, I have to mention, like, it's thanks to them that we've been able to scale this event, and also the support of other partners, but particularly the guidance and sponsorship there. And what we do on the scholarship scheme is we basically have a form on the website. Producers have to fill out, smallholder producers, their profile, type of farm, the coffees they have, and then we award free tickets and often other benefits, such as sponsoring hotels or whatever it might be, to make sure that the right people attend. And what that meant basically was that, in relation to when I said about the very first event in El Salvador, and it wasn't necessarily represented by smallholder producers, which is what we aim for, is that we try and ensure that these participants are there. And when we had around 500 producers in Guatemala as a result of this scheme, I remember a roaster really being shocked, because they were attending a cupping and there were producers who were walking around the event very, very shy. Like, they hadn't necessarily traveled abroad. It was their first kind of big event. And we encouraged, through having local translators, and even at the time just our team members being there to facilitate the translation, the roasters to talk to these producers. And I remember this one roaster, like, they sat down with the producer and said, well, how much are you being paid for your coffee? And at the time, I mean, this is 4 years ago, it was something like 80 cents. And I think for the producer, for the roaster, it was like, well, what do you mean? Like, we pay this. So you often hear about producers saying, oh, how come roasters? I think it was referenced in Dean's recent episode. Sorry. I'll do it again, shall I? I think that it was referenced in Costas's recent episode about how producers are very aware that their coffee's sold for a lot more money abroad. And they kind of look at it and they look at the math and they think, how does that add up? But similarly, we saw on the other side, this roaster interacting with the producer saying, well, how is that possible? We're buying coffee for, at the very least, tens of dollars, if not more. And you're paid, like, how does that work? And then, of course, in the event, the co-op that producer sold their coffee to in Cherry was there. And so was the trader, so was the exporter. So the dialogue was able to take place. And it didn't just stop there and it was like, oh, that's terrible. It was more, well, let's explain. So this roaster said, well, how? And it was explained that actually, if you look at the value chain transformation, yes, the producer is probably not paid enough for their coffee, that's definite. But let's go through the supply chain. It was like, well, it was the price in Cherry. It was picked up from the farm instead of transported to the mill. So there was a cost there. The exporter, the cooperative, this time absorbed a lot of the other costs. And it was just a really interesting point, because I think that this roaster, who thought that they had their supply chain completely down and they understood everything, they were confronted with, to a certain degree, the reality. of what happens. And that was really important. And then even small discussions as a roaster, like a roaster might get a chance to talk with producers and then know about how does it work with green coffee samples? What's the best way of receiving them? What's the best way of shipping them? What do people look for? And then also like often producers might have the idea that every roaster abroad should pay a price premium. And especially if they're in certain markets, they'll pay huge prices just because. And we have this platform where people are all there sharing ideas, talking, engaging, having engaging discussions with each other. And you can see that for the producer, it's enlightening as well, because it's like, yeah, well, we might sell our coffee for X amount in the coffee shop in the US, but let's walk through how that happens. And similarly, the other way around about, well, and I think there's sometimes it can be a harsh reality for the producer. Like when you have this dynamic, honest space of discussion, it's like, well, why should we pay you $10 a pound for your coffee? Like we've got another partner here who's here. We pay this person this much. Or we actually buy a coffee from Brazil and this is how much we pay. And we can have these real discussions. And I think that it's important, like it can be convenient just to be like, well, like it's not really appropriate to talk about those things. But actually it is important, like it's informative. It leads the industry forward and people leave feeling inspired and informed and realizing like this is the area that they want to focus on, whether it be the producer or the roaster. And I think that the goalposts are constantly moving, but for roasters, I think that we've had all different profiles of roasters attend the event, ranging from people who are literally just starting and who are just roasting on their 1 kilo and they're just going. But I think that people learn when they're like going back to my all original discussion that I had right at the beginning was that they learn to ask about more than just price, right? They learn to ask about the different components which contribute to that price. They learn to understand about different ways which coffee can be sourced or how different ways it can be financed. Because another vision that we really want to push forward for PRF is and we're not there yet, but if you look at, say, the original discussion I mentioned to you where we look at roasters paying the maximum price to producers, right? But we don't often look at what happens after that, right? And where does the money go? And we've talked a bit about direct trade, so we can discuss it a little bit more here. And what happens if a roaster is paying a high price, but that's going, say, to a cooperative who is then passing that fee or that payment onto the producer? What's happening in that gap in between there? Like that traditionally is kind of, we don't really look at that too much in specialty coffee. It's a blank space. So if at PRF, I think it'd be amazing if we can have a producer there and a roaster there and they can decide, okay, they want to work together. They're met at the event. They like their coffees. The roasters cup them. There's a synergy. Perhaps if at the event we have all different coffee exporters there, they can then go around to different exporters and say, hey, look, we think we're going to work together. This is what we're thinking of buying. Like, what can you offer? How does it work in terms of logistics, financing? What's going to happen there? Similarly, we've got all the green coffee importers there as well, or a large number of them. And that for a producer is very, very empowering. For a roaster, it's good business, and it might be how many roasters already operate in terms of sourcing and all their products and how they manage. But for a producer, they're often not in the position where they can think, okay, well, I've got options here. So I'm going to export my coffee to this roaster. So who else is in this room that we can work with? And imagine, right, if this happens, and then a producer can find the right exporter they want to work with. So yeah, this is the one. They're giving us a good price. We like their payment terms. This seems fair. And then on top of that, we have the banks there. And then the roaster can say, well, I'm going to guarantee this purchase. Here, I'm going to give a letter of credit, and based on that, maybe we can go to the different banks and have a chat with them and say, look, I'm currently paying 18% for my credit here. Is there any chance that you can match it, or what can you do? And this is the platform that we really want to build, so that the producer's really empowered because they have the actor there willing to support them. And ultimately, if we go back to the beginning point, like it's good business, it's a good message. And also, if a roaster can build a synergy with a producer and have a really meaningful direct relationship where, frankly, maybe even they'll be able to find efficiencies where they're able to pay the producer more without actually costing them as much money, it's a win-win. And this is where we want to keep going. We want to keep pushing ideas and having those discussions. And it sounds like an ideal, which might not be reached, but we're getting closer every year. and getting more and more people involved. So in the case of a smallholder producer, like we learned with the very first events in El Salvador that people wouldn't just attend if we put the event up. Like build it and they'll come is not enough. So then we built in my Yoga scholarship scheme where we deliberately kind of targeted and invited those producers. And then we found, well, actually, those producers will be attending, but the ones who will really be doing business will be the producers who are already traveling abroad and have that experience. And simply the roasters will be interacting with them with the ones who have that experience as well. So how can we ensure that these producers are actually participating? Like, okay, well, do we have simultaneous translations on hand? Yeah, we do. Is that enough? What else can we do? And actually, like, it's really remarkable is that when people can see the synergy happening, like a lot of, say, the parties who people might have said in the past were like anti, say, specialty, particularly, say, coffee traders, they're the ones who step in and say, look, what do you need? We could, because a lot of them, obviously, they believe in the specialty coffee industry and they want to support it, and also because it's good business. So we're trying to build more efficiency because I think that the industry as a whole, and for coffee roasters to keep growing and to be offering values, we need consumers to be drinking better coffee and paying a price premium for it. And we need to keep finding efficiencies to do that because we can't just rely on the idea that we'll get consumers to pay more money. I don't think it's going to work. We can't just keep passing it on, because what's happened as well is that we saw when the C market price increased last year quite significantly, and the price is still fluctuating, is that it's hard, right, to just keep paying more and keep passing it on. It needs to be a case of finding efficiencies, finding points of differentiation. That's what the event's about. It's about doing good business with good partners. And the event is built around producers and roasters. And then everyone else who is there are key participants that support that vision. So you have the baristas, you have the local cafe owners, you have everyone who wants to interact with those groups. And similarly, even the international attendees, you have roasters, but you also have green coffee traders, importers. They're all there and present. And I think it's quite a humbling experience. And even what I've learned is that some of the most humble and roasters that attended have often been the most successful with the most experience. Like people attended 20, 30, 40 years of green coffee buying. And they're the ones that are coming there and saying, this is something different. Actually, I want to bring my team to this. I want to bring 2, 3, 4 people because I can learn from this and also my team can learn. And
just say that this is, I mean, you call it an ideal, but it sounds like from what you've created and for so far, obviously highly possible. And there's a lot of energy behind it to work out your supply chain live in one event sounds really awesome. And the idea that, you have a lot of people collectively rethinking things because they're in face-to-face dialogue. Obviously, relationships last past the initial encounter with somebody on the show floor. You exchange information, you probably continue talking with them, and relationships are born from that, but also different ways of doing business. And you're not wasting your money and your time going down a path that you've now found out is not going to be as fruitful as the one that you've discovered. And so there's so much there. And when you talk about the efficiencies, as your event grows, obviously the impact can't just be, or I don't imagine you would want it to be, just something that is felt and at the event and relegated to the event itself. It's going to change the way, or hopefully the way, that people dialogue outside of the event, because you could have these conversations, and it feels like the event is giving people permission to have these conversations and pursue them because it's efficient to do so. You're right there. But in the other parts of the world, say you can't make it to a forum, you can't make it to the event, you still have the inspiration of that, in the spirit of that, to influence what you do with your time and your energy and your communication. So as you look out to the industry as a whole and you forecast where you would like to see it go, just virtue of what you've seen at this event, how would you like to see the industry evolve in terms of how we communicate between the consumers, including roasters with that, and producers? You're privy to all of this magic at these events. The greater industry could benefit from a little of that magic, whether they go to the event or not. How do you want to see the industry evolve?
That's a hard question. There's lots of points to consider. So if you asked me 6 years ago, or I would have perhaps focused on exclusively on specialty coffee. And by that, I mean the third wave coffee that I kind of outlined earlier. But the first thing is we need to drink more coffee. Producing countries, consuming countries, we want to drive coffee consumption of all coffees. Because I think everyone started drinking a certain coffee and then we progressed and graduated from that and then went on to different coffees and joined the industry and became enthused and passionate, exciting, ended up building businesses around it. But I think that a really important point is just to encourage the drinking all coffees and also to build an event and an industry where everyone is truly welcome. Where if you're roasting thousands of containers of dark roasted and potentially not high quality coffee in the third wave industry's eyes, like absolutely come along. We want you to take part of it. You're the ones running the industry. We need you to be involved. And that's the first thing for me. I think that the second point, you mentioned about communication between producers and roasters. I think that's going to happen over time, and it is happening already, whereas the information is increasingly available, whether it be Perfect Daily Grind, the other great coffee publications that are out there, local media, in the case of producing countries, local radio. That is gradually happening, and people are increasingly aware of the choices they have along the whole supply chain. So the industry that I want to see is I want people to be increasingly involved and understanding of everything that happens along the coffee supply chain. If they are the individuals who are directly profiting from it and building a business around it, just because that's smart business. And I also think that the industry, we will see right now over the next few years, it's going to be an interesting time because when coffee price went extremely high in the eyes of, say, a lot of roasters and green buyers as compared to before, it kind of shifted things a little bit because a lot of the parts of specialty coffee have been built around paying a price premium when there was a low market price. But now the price went up and is kind of fluctuating. It's an interesting time because roasters are kind of somewhat faced with the reality of what the industry wanted, right? Which was, let's push and pay producers more because that's good for the industry. But I think that over the next few years, we're going to see roasters, we're going to see them shifting between origins, looking at which one works best for them. And then we're also going to see roasters maybe changing their buying habits and looking for platforms such as PRF to find efficiencies and synergies. And similarly, I think we're going to see producers who may be increasingly aware of their value, the ones that do produce outstanding coffees and have good, solid relationships. And it's going to be an interesting time because I don't think the industry can just keep going along as it has been with a large number of smallholder producers. Let's say in the case of Colombia, which is where I am right now, we can't just assume that those smallholder producers will always be there and always be grateful to be paid a small price premium, especially when the market's high. And actually, maybe they're not going to keep going into coffee. Maybe they're going to look at alternatives, whether it be tourism, whether it be working in the city, whether it be traveling abroad, whatever it might be. And I think that we may see consolidation of farms. We may see vertical integration along the supply chain. There's lots of different scenarios, but I think that over the next years, I think the most important thing is that wherever you are in any business, particularly obviously in coffee, is that each supply chain actor knows and understands their value, what they add, and looks to accentuate it and take advantage of it. So producers becoming experts in what they do, they may already be experts in what they do. Maybe finding those missing components, whether it be commercial relationships or whether it be understanding about specific processing production methods or learning about how actually if they want to export coffee to China, this is how they could do it. And similarly with roasters, looking and being like, well, let's look at my business. Like, what do we do? What do we exist? What is the wrong we want to right? How do we scale and compete with other roasters as we grow? Because I think that a lot of ideas, like we've always made it simple in coffee that like we'll just continue to scale as a coffee roaster. And as we scale, we'll do the same as what we're doing on a bigger level. But in the case of what the experience we've learned from Producer Roaster Forum is that as roasters, as in any business scale, they want to compete into a new and different market sometimes to access a larger consumer base, and that can change the whole business model, right? If you want to start selling coffee to people outside of a few select locations where people have the disposable income to pay a lot of money for coffee, then, and you want to go after, say, the mass premium consumer or the mass consumer, maybe the coffee has to be adjusted. And then when you want to hit in that market, maybe in that market, they are very price sensitive. And maybe even though you don't want to, that your competitors are dropping their price. So then what do you do there? So I really think that everyone needs to be looking at how they fit into the supply chain. Where do they add value, and looking to accentuate their value. And the industry that I want to see is that people become increasingly well informed, and that people don't just accept things the way they are and say, well, this is what we do and happy days. So it has to be, well, this is what we're doing now. And it might not be right. We thought it was. When it's not necessarily the truth. We're going to look and study and see what everyone else is doing, see what the industry is doing, see what consumers want, and we're going to adapt. I mean, I could talk for ages, but even, say, the growth of RTD has been explosive recently. And that's a whole new growth segment of now we have young Gen Z consumers who want to replace soda for coffee. That's really cool. We have to just get the whole industry to promote the idea of let's just drink more coffee as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because the more coffee we drink, the more people get involved. And then gradually over time, we can pick up those consumers and elevate their drinking habits to drink certain coffees that we think are better.
That's wonderful. I like what you said there with this is what we do now. And it leaves room for being curious, connected, refining, finding efficiencies, and staying in touch with the why behind what you're doing, because it could change. The why behind your company, the things your company needs as it grows is going to change as well. And that's just good business in general, to stay in touch with that and not to just, call victory on all of those the operations and methodologies, et cetera, and then ride out into the sunset. It is necessary to move with the industry. And that's just the mark of a good organism is good circulation. That's how you stay alive. And so I really appreciate that you've created so many different ways for people to connect and to be informed in ways that are meaningful and transformative to the industry. So I appreciate you being on the show and having this conversation. So where can we go to learn more about Perfect Daily Grind, what you do in Roasters Forum?
Yeah, so producerroasterforum.com is where we have all the information about the two events. So we have one March the 16th and 17th in El Salvador, one September 14th and 15th as well. We've got two this year, which we're really excited about. For reading about the industry, head to perfectdailygrind.com, and we have publications also in Portuguese and Spanish. And then if you want a more, say, holistic, less third wave view of the industry, more long reads looking at where the industry might be in several years' time and exploring new consuming origins or consuming regions such as China and India, I recommend going to Coffee Intelligence as well. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to offer different media for different readerships as well. That is intelligence.coffee for that publication.
Wonderful. Yeah, I've been enjoying that as of late, actually. Yeah. So wonderful. Thank you, Henry. Again, it was really great to talk to you. So many great ideas, and just the proof of concept in these events is really heartening, and really thankful for you.
Well, thanks very much, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure, and keep doing what you're doing. I really enjoy the podcast.
Well, everybody, I hope that was inspiring to know that there's an event like this happening where that kind of impact is the result. Just goes to show you that the industry wants and needs this latent desire for connection and conversation and coming to a clear understanding where the other party is coming from leads us to great places as an industry. Obviously, it would be wonderful if you are able to go and attend the Producer Roaster Forum. Outside of that, you always have the ability to dig in deeper, to say, like Henry said, this is what we're doing now. But what do we need to do in the future? Let's hold these things with an open hand so we can evolve with the industry, so we can innovate to reach more markets, so we can welcome more producers, and take Henry's example of what started as just an AeroPress on his counter from his aunt, to now creating value for producers and roasters through events and this forum. It's really something that I think should inspire all of us to take the opportunities we have and use them to push the industry forward in just the same way. So a huge thank you to Henry Wilson for joining us on the show. We really appreciated your insights and passion for these things. I'm grateful for the work you do. If you want to stay in touch with all that's going on, go ahead and visit perfectdailygrind.com. For the Producer Roaster Forum, go to producerroasterforum.com. And finally, for another layer of being informed, you need to go and check out intelligence.coffee. So if you have any questions, comments, or feedback from me, go ahead and email chris@keystotheshop.com. That's also where you can reach out if you're interested in working one-on-one with me to help you build an amazing cafe, to refine your operations, your quality, your people, your leadership. Let's have a conversation. That email again, chris@keystotheshop.com. And now, in terms of how gatherings are a catalyst for change, one good piece of information in the right place will change your life. Every single one of us can attest to that. And one of the things I love seeing is when I go to Coffee Fest, I see this spark go off in people's minds a lot, whether that's at a lecture, a training, a workshop, during a panel discussion, on the show floor, at the trade show booths and everything else. There's just those moments that determine what you do in the future. And if you hadn't gone, you might not have gotten to that conclusion. At least it might not have happened as soon as it did. And that's what I love about Coffee Fest. It's the center for a lot of this information that coffee retailers need to make good decisions that will, in fact, impact your life and your customers and your staff's lives. So go to coffeefest.com to check out the upcoming shows. Very soon on March 5th through the 7th, there is the New York City show. And then following that in June, there's Louisville, followed by Anaheim in August and Orlando in the fall. Coffeefest.com is where you can learn more. Get 50% off your registration when you use the code KEYS, KEYS. You save 50% off your registration when you get yourself and your team signed up for Coffee Fest. Go check out what they have to offer. I've been doing this show since 2004, and it doesn't get old, I'll tell you that much. So I really hope to see you there at one of these shows. Again, check them out over at coffeefest.com. That is the end of our show today, everybody. Thank you so much for being a listener, for sharing these episodes, for subscribing. Really could not do this without all of your support. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.